Forget everything you know about Elvis's romances. There was one name that made Graceland tremble. While the world watched Elvis's engagement to Priscilla, the king was living a secret, explosive, and absolutely electric affair with the one woman who matched him in everything. She wasn't a fan, she was his mirror, the female Elvis, Ann-Margret. What really happened behind the scenes of Viva Las Vegas that almost changed history forever? Why was this the one romance that, according to sources, Priscilla Presley truly feared? And what was the silent pact they made? A pact proven by flowers and a presence at a funeral that lasted until Elvis's final day. Today, we're telling the story the Colonel tried to cover up and the King could never forget. Our story begins in 1963, but to understand the explosion, we first need to understand the fuse. Elvis Presley, at 28, was at the height of his cinematic fame, but he was bored. He was trapped in what he himself called the Hollywood formula. His movies were profitable but artistically empty, and his co-stars were, for the most part, passive and forgettable. He was filming his 15th movie, Love in Las Vegas. The name would be changed later, and he needed a counterpart. But MGM didn't just choose anyone. They chose Ann-Margret. Let's stop right here. Ann-Margret, at 22, was no ordinary starlet. She was already a force of nature. She had just starred in the smash hit Bye Bye Birdie, which landed her a cover on Life magazine. She was a star in her own right, a Golden Globe winner for New Star of the Year. The press didn't call her the female Elvis for nothing. She had the same raw, magnetic energy. Their first meeting wasn't on set, but in a sound studio. Ann-Margret, in her autobiography, described the moment. The entire room, full of assistants and musicians, fell silent. Elvis extended his hand and, with that smooth southern charm, said, "I've never heard much about you, but I hear you're a great singer." Ann-Margret, nervous but quick, replied, "And I've heard you're a pretty good singer too." The ice didn't just break, it evaporated. In that instant, they recognized each other, not as the king and the rising star, but as two sides of the same coin. When the cameras started rolling on Viva Las Vegas, what happened wasn't acting. It was combustion. The director, George Sidney, saw it on day one. He saw the electricity and made a production decision that would change everything. He told a colleague, and I quote, "You can feel the heat." He immediately threw out the original script's balance and started focusing the cameras on both of them. The film, which was supposed to be just another Elvis vehicle, transformed into a duet. They didn't just act together, they lived together on set. A famous bit of trivia is their love for motorcycles. This wasn't a publicity stunt. They would actually take their Triumphs and race around the MGM backlot, often to the terror of producers who feared for their multi-million-dollar stars. They shared a silly, almost childish sense of humor that Elvis's inner circle, the Memphis Mafia, immediately loved. They weren't used to co-stars who weren't intimidated by Elvis. Ann-Margret wasn't just unintimidated, she teased him right back. Joe Esposito, Elvis's friend, later said that Ann-Margret was the most like Elvis of any woman he'd ever met. The Come On Everybody dance scene is the perfect document of this time. Look closely. They're not just dancing, they're in a duel. They mirror each other, every hip swivel, every spin. It's a battle of charisma, and for the first time, Elvis wasn't winning, he was tying. They were perfectly in sync. All of this, of course, led to the panic of one man, Colonel Tom Parker. The Colonel was furious. He sent angry memos to MGM. He wasn't paying for an Elvis and Ann-Margret movie. He complained that the director was giving the girl too many close-ups, that the film was becoming an Ann-Margret showcase. What the Colonel really feared wasn't screen time, it was power. For the first time, Elvis was with a woman who was his equal in energy, talent, and charisma.
A woman who couldn't be controlled, not by Elvis and not by him.
But Elvis, for the first time in years, didn't care about the Colonel. He was having fun. He was alive. The romance moved off-screen and became Hollywood's worst-kept secret. Everyone on set knew. Soon, the press would know. While Rusty and Lucky fell in love on screen, Elvis and Ann-Margret began an intense and very real romance. A romance that had only one insurmountable obstacle: a young woman named Priscilla, waiting patiently back at Graceland. And when filming wrapped, the real drama was just beginning. But before we dive into the conflict, I want to know your opinion. Based just on what we saw in Viva Las Vegas, the chemistry, the dancing, the energy, do you think this romance ever had a chance to last? Or was it an explosion destined to burn out? Leave your opinion in the comments. And now, let's see what happened when the cameras stopped. When the cameras on Viva Las Vegas stopped rolling, the romance between Elvis and Ann-Margret didn't slow down. It intensified. What began on a supervised film set transformed into a secret affair that would last for over a year. This was not a passing Hollywood fling. It was deep. Elvis was back to his life at Graceland, and Ann-Margret was on her own rising career path, but the connection was kept alive through long, secret hours on the telephone.
They had their own private nicknames. She called him EP, or Scooby. He affectionately called her Rusty, the name of her character from the film that brought them together. It was a sign that, for him, the magic of that set had never ended. What made this relationship so powerful? Ann-Margret understood something few people did: the golden cage of fame. Elvis could be himself with her. He didn't have to be the king. He could be the man who loved motorcycles, who had a silly sense of humor, and who was deeply burdened by the pressures of his manager and his life. Even Elvis's friends, the Memphis Mafia, adored Ann-Margret. For the first time, Elvis was with someone they didn't have to entertain or take care of. She was part of the fun. She could keep up with their pace and his. Joe Esposito, Elvis's right-hand man, confirmed that Ann-Margret was the woman most like Elvis he had ever met. In her autobiography, she was clear: "We were truly soulmates, he and I." But while this deep love blossomed in secret, a huge shadow loomed from Graceland. Let's be clear about the context of 1963. Elvis wasn't just dating Priscilla Presley. The situation was incredibly more complex. Priscilla, then a teenager, had moved from Germany and was living at Graceland under the guardianship of Elvis and his father, Vernon. Elvis had made a solemn promise to Priscilla's parents that he would take care of her, that he would let her finish high school, and that one day he would marry her. Breaking that promise didn't just mean ending a relationship. It would mean a colossal scandal, a breach of honor, and a personal and public crisis. Elvis was, therefore, living two lives: the life of passion and the life of promise. He was caught between two women who represented two totally different futures. On one side, Ann-Margret, the independent woman, his equal in fame, his mirror. A future with her would be a power couple, two forces of nature together. On the other, Priscilla, the young woman he was molding, who represented home, stability, duty, and the promise of a traditional family, far from the Hollywood spotlight. This tightrope couldn't last. The breaking point came in 1964, and how exactly it happened depends on which source you believe. The first version, and the most famous, is the one from the press. Ann-Margret was in London promoting a film. A reporter asked her directly about Elvis. She, perhaps out of naivety, perhaps out of hope, gave an answer that the press distorted and published in world headlines: "We're engaged." The news exploded. The news reached Graceland. The second version, more intimate and perhaps more painful, comes from Priscilla herself in her book, Elvis and Me. She didn't read it in the papers. She found out on her own. She confronted Elvis. The story goes that Elvis, caught off guard, first tried to deny it, then tried to minimize it, using the classic excuse that it was just publicity for the film. But Priscilla didn't back down. She knew it was real. Regardless of which spark lit the fire, the explosion was the same. Elvis was cornered. The situation became unsustainable. We can't forget the third player in this drama, Colonel Tom Parker. The Colonel saw Ann-Margret as a threat. She was uncontrollable. She had her own career, her own managers. She didn't fit the wife mold the Colonel wanted for Elvis's image. Priscilla, on the other hand, was perfect. Young, private, and completely within the control of the Elvis world. The Colonel undoubtedly pressured Elvis to make the right choice for the business. And so the choice was made. Passion versus promise. The mirror versus the project. Ann-Margret describes the moment in her book. The phone rang. It was Elvis from Graceland. He told her point blank that the press had made things impossible. He said he had to keep his promise to Priscilla. She describes a silence on the phone, a silence she called devastating. There was no fight. There was no yelling. There was just the cold understanding that it was all over. And then he said goodbye. The romance ended. Ann-Margret's heart, she said, was broken. And here is the most telling detail, the epilogue to this chapter. On May 1, 1967, Elvis Presley married Priscilla Beaulieu. Just 8 days later, 8! On May 9, 1967, Ann-Margret married actor Roger Smith. And here is the most controversial point of this whole story, and I need to know what you think. Did Elvis make the right choice? Should he have risked it all for the passion and equality he had with Ann-Margret? Or did he do the right thing by honoring his promise to Priscilla? That is the big question. Tell me in the comments who you think was the true love of his life. The end of an era, sealed in 2 different chapels, 1 a week apart. But what looked like an end was, in fact, the transformation of their bond into something completely different, something that would last forever. In May 1967, with a gap of merely 8 days, Elvis Presley and Ann-Margret married other people. To the world, to the press, this was the categorical end of the story. The explosive Viva Las Vegas romance was officially over, filed away as just another Hollywood affair. But they were wrong. What happened after these weddings is perhaps the most profound and revealing part of their relationship. The passionate romance had ended, yes, but the unbreakable bond, that was just beginning to take a new form. Ann-Margret continued her career and became, just like Elvis, one of the biggest stars in Las Vegas. And this is where their silent pact begins, the secret language that only the 2 of them understood. For the rest of Elvis Presley's life, for every single opening night that Ann-Margret had in Las Vegas, a huge and spectacular flower arrangement would arrive at her dressing room. Sources confirmed that this never failed, not once. It didn't matter if Elvis was on tour, secluded in Graceland, or even in his darkest days. The arrangement arrived on time. And the arrangement? Almost always, it was symbolically a guitar made of flowers, or a sea of pink roses, her favorite color. There wasn't a long, gushing note. It wasn't needed. Just the initials that said it all, EP. It was Elvis's silent way of saying, I see you, I remember, I respect you, I'm still with you. This leads to an obvious question. What about her husband? Ann-Margret was married to actor Roger Smith for 50 years until his death. Far from being an obstacle, Roger Smith is a crucial part of this story. He understood. He knew the depth of what Ann-Margret and Elvis had. Roger Smith didn't see Elvis as a rival or a threat. He saw a deep bond that had transformed into a platonic friendship built on mutual respect. Ann-Margret herself said her husband was an incredibly secure and understanding man. It was Roger's respect and security that allowed this silent pact to continue with such dignity without any scandals. They kept in touch, though sporadically. They were no longer lovers, but they were friends. Biographers like Peter Guralnick tell of a time in 1971 when Elvis was the undisputed king of the International Hotel in Vegas. He heard that Rusty was in town, opening her own show. He didn't hesitate. He called her hotel room. He invited her, along with Roger, to his show. They met briefly backstage, like old friends, reminiscing about the past with fondness, not regret. They had found a balance few people ever achieve. But the final, most powerful proof of this unbreakable bond would come on the darkest day. We fast forward to August 16, 1977. The king was dead. When the news shocked the world, Ann-Margret was in rehearsals for a new show. She broke down and canceled everything immediately. Elvis's funeral was a chaotic event. Thousands of hysterical fans surrounded Graceland. The world's press descended on Memphis. But let's be clear about who didn't go. None of the other 30 co-stars from Elvis's films. None of the other countless Hollywood girlfriends and flings. Most, understandably, sent flowers and telegrams, but didn't want to or couldn't face the media circus. But Ann-Margret got on a plane. She and her husband, Roger Smith, flew to Memphis. She was the only one, the only star from his romantic Hollywood past who had the courage, the love, and the decency to go say goodbye in person. Photos from that day show her in dark sunglasses, visibly devastated, walking silently into the mansion. She didn't speak to the press. She didn't seek the spotlight. She sat for 3 hours at the open casket viewing, mourning not the rock star the world lost, but the man she called EP. Her presence was a shock to many, but to those who knew the real story, it was the final confirmation. And after the funeral, she fell silent. For decades, Ann-Margret refused to speak publicly about Elvis. While others published tell-all books for money and fame, she was fiercely protective of his memory. She had a deep respect for Priscilla and for Lisa Marie. She didn't want the beautiful, pure story they lived to be reduced to a tabloid scandal. It was only in 1994, 17 years after his death, that she finally told her side in her autobiography, My Story. She didn't do it for money. She did it, she said, because their story was too special to be forgotten or to be told incorrectly by others. It was there she finally confirmed the romance, the deep love, and most importantly, the term that fans had always suspected, soulmate. Elvis's story is complex. Priscilla was his wife, Mrs. Presley, the mother of his only child. That is a fact. But what Ann-Margret's pact proves is that Elvis's heart was large and divided. Priscilla was his home and his promise. But Ann-Margret, she was his mirror, his equal. The flower arrangement that arrived year after year and her lonely presence at that Memphis funeral prove one thing. A romance can end, but an unbreakable bond lasts forever.
The story of Elvis Presley is a universe of passion, music, and unforgettable moments, like this unbreakable bond he shared with Ann-Margret. Keeping this memory alive, with the research, depth, and respect that the king deserves, is our main mission here on the channel. If you, like us, believe that Elvis's legacy is eternal and want to keep discovering the real stories behind the myth, then I invite you to become part of our community. If you enjoyed this deep dive analysis, please click the subscribe button right below. But don't stop there. Next to subscribed, click that notification bell. When you ring the bell, YouTube alerts you the exact minute a new video like this one goes live. You won't want to miss it. Hitting that like button is crucial. When you like this video, you're telling YouTube that this story is important and that more fans of the king need to see it. It helps us grow immensely and continue this research. And finally, if you thought of someone while watching, share this video.
Send it on WhatsApp or Facebook to that friend or family member who also loves the king and needs to know the details of this story. Thank you for watching until the end. We'll see you in the next story. Long live the king!